So let's get started while we're here. So, how many of you were here this morning? Just a show of hands. Wow. Real funsters, huh? Come back. Right, so there's not much written about this event, so I want to say a little bit about how I'm going to conduct it. Because this isn't really about me lecturing you, or saying this is how it is, or this is how it should be. It's a little bit less formal than that. Oh, sorry. It's instead a little bit of a discussion with props and chocolate and flowers. So what we'll be discussing, or what I want to actually get out of this next hour, is to think about the role that the system of money that we have plays. Like what are the implications of the financial system that we have? How did we get to the point where the financial system we currently have works the way that it does? So these are the sorts of questions I want you guys to keep in your heads, that I want you to intervene, interrupt. Don't feel that there's any point at which questions are allowed and they're not, except for one or two of you who've been warned by me beforehand. So, the really specific question I want to get to, and it's going to be a long and esoteric ride, so forgive me, but there is a purpose to it. We're going to start 4,000 years in the past, and we're going to get up to the present day, is to ask, what does a progressive financial system look like? And I'm going to ask the question. I'm not answering the question. So how would the money system need to work? Does it matter if money is created by banks or by any other private institution? Does it matter more how money is created, by whom and for what? And under what conditions should we have private, public, local, community, national, or even global financial institutions? And who should run them? These are all the questions that we're trying to answer right now, that are being debated, and in the wake of the financial crisis are on the lips of every policymaker, every economist. And we need to have an answer as a progressive movement. But setting that moment aside, I hope I'm not going to have too earnest a journey into the history of money. So, we're going to talk about how the financial system works now, how it got to the point at which we are now, and talk a little bit about what progressive ideas around money should be or are, or whether they're good or bad. So, think about things like the terms you would have heard: quantitative easing, subprime, derivatives. What are these things? Why do they matter? Why do they have an effect so far beyond their immediate location? What about the policies that you will have heard about? A Robin Hood tax, public or cooperative banks, nationalization, banning interest, banning the creation of money, banning money even. There's a few people from Zeitgeist who've been saying that. I totally disagree, by the way. So feel free to ask questions. So, shall we get started? Everybody comfortable? Right. What I want to talk about in terms of money isn't just in a sort of generic and banal sense, but really I want to talk about what is a money system. What is the money behind the money system? For that, we have to think about what is international currency. Money that has value and is used in exchange outside of a country's borders. The first time that that occurred was 4,000 years ago in Babylon. Since then, countries like Greece, ancient Greece, had the drachma, which is used far beyond their own borders. In Europe, apart from Greece, the Roman Empire and its currency took over the role of the international currency, its aureus and its denarius, based on gold and silver. What these currencies had in common were they were metallic. What they also had in common were they were the currency of the prevailing political power. I know, I'm appalled too. So as the classical Roman Empire gave way to the Byzantine one, you had the solidus, by way of, and this is an interesting little detail, Nero, the emperor of Rome, who began something that has actually historically been very consistent, and that was to steal the gold out of his own money, debase it. And actually, an analysis, and even statistical analysis, has found that every time an empire begins to near its own demise, obviously they didn't know that at the time, you'll find that its currency will be debased. Everybody know what that means? That they steal the gold out of the money, they stick more lead in. lead or other less precious metals. Unlike the previous Roman, and especially in the time of Nero, currency, the Byzantine solidus stayed solid for 700 years without being debased. It reflects probably the stability of that empire. And this is not a frivolous point I'm trying to make. What I'm trying to say is that the power of that money, and remember, I'm talking about money as an international currency, as something that goes beyond its borders, was tied completely to the political context from which it emerged. So in medieval times, as we moved forward, you had the genuine, which was Genoa's currency, as the international currency. And it was quickly replaced by the florin from Florence, and it was quickly replaced by the ducat from Venice. And in each case, the different context of those empires brought with them different financial innovations. In Italy, you had the first exchange of paper in place of the money. The money was held, or I should say the precious metal, somewhere else. But the paper that was written to notify or to validate the fact that that metal was there was traded. So we begin to see something a little bit more familiar, the trade of paper. But it's still based on gold. It's still based on some value. And as we shift power over time to the north of Europe, and you have northern European states begin to compete for empire, we had a very interesting series of financial innovations and changes to the financial system that emerged in all places, the Netherlands. Who wants to guess why I have these? Why do I have tulips? Because of the black tulip and the tulip bulb crisis. The black tulip, specifically Alexander Dumas. Very expensive tulip. Who hasn't heard about the tulip crisis? I'm going to go into it in depth, so great, okay. I'm going to give you guys a flower, not all of you, I've only got 4. And the person that gets it is going to have to keep hold of the idea that I want to emphasize about what we're doing. So, the first thing we talked about was that money and its role internationally, underpinning some sort of financial system. You're going to hold this. You've already made comments, I saw you. So I know you're engaged. Was that money was related to power. And whenever we come back to that, I want you to think about that, and it's your job to engage with the rest of us and say, I think this is relevant again. But what we're moving to, with the movement of power and the attempts by the Dutch to usurp, first of all, to liberate themselves from the Spanish Empire, and then to compete with the British, the Spanish, and the Portuguese for the trade in the Dutch East Indies, was a series of innovations that begin to frame what we know as the modern financial system. First of all, the different states, city-states in the Netherlands came together, and they brought their finances together. One of the first things that they sought to do was to find a way to finance their trips overseas all the way to Indonesia through the trade routes. And how they did that drove the financial innovation. Sometimes less than half the ships sent out would not return. Nobody could afford to finance this themselves. A little bit like the Merchant of Venice. I'm sure a lot of you are about to intercede and say, no? Okay. This is meant to be an interactive hour, so I'm going to rush through my bit, and then we're going to have silence if you guys don't talk. It was unaffordable to individual merchants, to individual companies. So the Dutch Parliament, and here we see the intervention of the state. Another flower. Who wants it? You want that? You like the role of the state?
Yeah, I love it.
Huh? Good, good. Now you're in charge of the state. What are you in charge of? Money and power. Money and the state. Okay? Don't have eye contact with me, guys, because you will be getting flowers. You want the other color? I'm terribly sorry. So we had the invention of the first ever company held through shares, joint stock. What that meant was that you could buy, literally, a piece of the action. And the word for share in Dutch, which still is, any Italians in the audience like you guys over there can confirm, azione, a piece of the action, a share of the action. Because what you were able to buy with that share was a chance to share in the profits of that endeavor. What that meant for those companies was that they could raise much more money. And you had the first ever stock company. What that brought about very, very quickly was trading in shares, because people couldn't liquidate them. They had no idea what was going on the other side of the world and whether that boat would come back, so they could sell it. And with that innovation, and with the fact that it took so much time, you had the futures market. Is anybody here familiar with what a future is? A derivative? A financial option? Who wants to explain?
A derivative?
Yes.
A derivative is a stock based on the value of something else. So it derives its value from, not from an intrinsic value, but from what it gives you the option of buying at another point.
Precisely. Precisely. So it means that a future is the promise to be able to buy something or sell it in the future. And that was relevant given what was happening and the nature of the business that they were in. What other innovation would have followed the invention of stocks and the trade in them? Shares were invented. How would you trade them? In a stock market. So where did the first stock market emerge? Amsterdam. The coffee shops of London was where London's once developed. But we'll get to London in a minute. So what we see in this little tale of the tulips, which I haven't even come to yet, is that the situation, the geographic situation of the distance, the political situation of the power, and let's not forget the violence that underpinned this. As the Netherlands' first Governor General of Indonesia, the man who built the trade routes, fortified them. What I mean by that is built forts along them and fought Spanish fleets and British fleets, said about the development of the Netherlands Empire and Netherlands trade was, we cannot make trade without war, nor war without trade. Money and power. So what about the tulips? The idea of the tulips and their relevance is that we saw the first ever financial bubble and crash. Now, actually, sort of historical evidence gets a little bit in the way of this being a good story because it wasn't quite as bad as people have made out. But nevertheless, the craze for tulips, black tulips being a mythical ideal of what somebody could genetically engineer through cultivation after many generations, became a mania in the Netherlands in the 1630s. What they didn't realize was that many of the very, very rare patterns on tulips were caused by a virus and weren't genetic at all. But they traded in them to the extent that tulip bulbs got to the point where they were worth 10 times the average annual salary of a person working in the Netherlands. There was a futures market in tulip bulbs because obviously you plant them now, but you don't know what's going to come out of the ground. And so again we see innovation driven by different contexts, different needs, and political decisions to build the parliament, to regulate for a new type of company, to give it a monopoly. So we see already 400 years ago that a money system or a financial system is not something that exists in the abstract, somewhere out there in the ether, but something that was to do with states, power, trade, and how they interact with each other. And the financial innovations that emerged, such as futures, such as options, such as derivatives, rested on the needs that whatever the specific situation was, built up or created in different companies in different countries. In February of 1632, I think, suddenly the tulip price collapsed because fundamentally it was unsustainable. It was unsustainable in the sense that people couldn't afford to pay for tulip bulbs that produced nothing except for a pretty tulip. But they couldn't afford to pay for something that actually had no underlying value. Remember I said it was a virus creating some of the most special patterns. I think it's called the mosaic virus or a mosaic virus. Cracking. So what was that bubble about? What does it mean? I think right now we're going to stop inflation and have a little chat and get some of your ideas before we move on about what money is, and before we get to the modern system, what you think we need to do about it. So I mentioned at the very beginning that we have a number of policy issues, from quantitative easing to banks being too big to bail, to policy measures like Robin Hood taxation, like capital controls. And I want to hear what some of you think. Who thinks, for example, that we should ban banks from creating money? I'm going to bribe you if you contribute, by the way. And my bribe is extremely relevant. I'm going to ask you to shout, and I'll repeat the question, because I can't quite get to you. You agree. Why do you agree? Banks create debt when they create money, and then? And they need interest to be paid back on that debt. Can I guess where this is going, which is growing and it's unsustainable? Do you think it's unsustainable in terms of the economy or in terms of the environment? Both. Who agrees with that? 4 hands so far. Who thinks that we should just ban interest? Why?
Because
I can't hear you.
because it creates debt.
Because it creates debt. Yeah. Fair enough. Who has some other views? You have a question, go on.
Yeah,
Here, take it.
sorry. If with, imagine I need like for my organization, my company, whatever, imagine I need like £10,000. I don't have that money. If I can go to the bank and borrow £10,000, maybe what I could do in 1 year with that purchase, I will eventually do in 10 years because I don't have financial resources now. So why is it bad to accelerate the system if I can deliver faster and maybe better in 1 year instead of 10 years by borrowing £10,000?
So if I've understood your question correctly, you're sort of suggesting maybe saying debt and interest being bad is a little bit counterproductive in case somebody could do, like you, better things with that money if it was only available to you. No, like, I mean, investing in small business, in renewable energy to help the planet so that interest doesn't destroy it, it helps save it. Stuff like that.
I would say the real problem is the extreme amount of interest charge. World Bank, for instance, can charge a country, I think it's up to 30 or 37% on some of these billion-dollar loans, and I think that's like, well, you're putting somebody in slavery, I think, in some ways.
Right, so in a way it's about the level of interest, not about the creation of money, not about the presence of interest itself. So at the stage we're sort of anti-pro, somewhere in between. You're desperate to say something.
Well, I mean, there are several things at stake here, I guess. So, like, I don't know, I think that the money supply should be nationalized and not made out of debt. So, not money equals debt. That's the first thing. And then about interest, I don't know, I'm quite, like, religious here. I mean, I guess that making money out of money is unethical. That's it. I mean, we should contribute to society doing something. Like, if I own a lot of money just because I've inherited a lot of money, and I just sit here and I let my money work for me, I don't know, well, here we could discuss if it's ethical or not, but to me it sounds a little bit, well, a little bit what's actually going on now. Apart from that, I guess the private banks produce money out of thin air, and they will borrow all our money that should belong to us, because we give value to money. I mean, I know it's a lot of stuff, but well.
Right, so we had the spectrum, anti-pro, medium, and sort of off the spectrum. Should money be created from debt? Is money created from debt? From debt? Fractional reserve bank. This is a phrase that comes up a lot in these workshops. I'm going to explain it. Absolutely. I doubt everybody's familiar with the word fractional reserve banking. Essentially, banks don't hold all the money we give them. We know that? Banks hold only a proportion that they're required to hold, the reserve, a fraction of the money they have. And the rest is lent out again. So they can lend out multiples of the money they are given. So if we deposit money with them, they can create many multiples of that money over and over again. So not only do they charge interest and make more be produced, the way that you were describing, They can do that in multiple directions at the same time, which is an explosive way to grow money. So what you're saying is that this is wrong. This needs to be controlled. Well, it used to be. It used to be that money was fixed to something. Who knows what that was? Shit. People are brilliant. So I think at this stage, somebody was a little bit late on the uptake there. I think at this stage we should talk about what we think money is. So I'm going to give you one of these. Give you one of these. And we're going to have a little debate about what we think money is. Who wants some chocolate? You like chocolate? Right. Don't eat it all at once. Oh, sorry. I shouldn't be throwing it left-handed. You've already got a flower.
Yeah, that's why. You can give me chocolate.
So what is money? What is it for, or how do we define it? I want to hear people shouting. Means of exchange. What else? Hoarding. So it's a store of value.
It tastes good.
It tastes good. I like that. You're having one. What else? Unit of account. Somebody studied this.
It's a repayment trust.
Power. Nice. Nice. Social control. National control. Well, if that could be cohere. What else? A fetish. Okay.
Not fair. Why she got a bigger one?
She got a bigger one. That's your issue.
It's not fair.
There you go. Having this one back. But hang on. This one says 2 on it, and that one says 1. So why is this one worth more?
Because when I eat with 1.
Because that one's 1, but this is worth 2.
Why when I eat with 1?
Well, okay, this is a point I'm trying to get at here. If I offered you £1 for that one and 2 for this one, which one's worth more?
Okay. I'm gonna get both.
No, okay is an answer. Which one's worth more? If I offer you £2, this one.
Yeah.
Somebody's guessed what I'm about to do.
These are based on real things, real chocolate.
These are based on real things, real chocolate. And what does that mean?
In other words, in theory, if you say in theory,
That's nice. If I say in theory, whatever, it's worth 2 if I offer you £2.
no, there's more chocolate.
There's more chocolate in that one. But what if I say I'm only willing to offer, oh, that's more chocolate coins, not a real one. But what if I offer you £2? I'm not telling you what it's worth. I'm saying that one's, I'll give you £2 for it. So what we're trying to get at here is the idea that money is basically what we agree it is. Social control, well, control depending on the terms. But basically, I gave you a chocolate coin. What if I gave you one of these? Oh, not one of those. That's real money. One of these. Who knows what this is? Shout. Bricks and pound. Who knows what it is? Explain how it works. Come on, share.
Locally traded money.
Locally traded money. It's worth £1, this one, so it's exchangeable for 1 sterling pound. Is this money? Yes. On what basis? People accept it. There's over 200 shops, independent traders. Is that right? A bricks and pound person here. He's got a fiver in the back. It's not bingo, but thank you. So wait, hang on. So is the chocolate money money?
Yes,
No.
it is.
Yes, it is. Why?
Because it's a commodity and it can be traded on the market. A commodity
Because it's a commodity. Because I offered something for it.
can be.
So if I took this to, well, Tower Hamlets, Hackney Borough, it's worth nothing. The bricks and pound, right? And the chocolate coin I'd probably get laughed at if I tried to pay for something with it, right? But if I tell you I'm going to give you £1 for that chocolate coin, it's suddenly worth £1. Money is basically what we agree to make it, right? Apart from being a store of value, a unit of account, and a means of exchange, I think I've got the lot there. Money is what we choose to make it. Oh, you got another one?
Money is something that we agree represents something else, and the other thing that the thing that it represents is a certain amount of human labour. When we talk about
Somebody's reading their traditional theory.
because I think it's true that when we talk about £5, there used to be £5 of silver, and silver represented a certain.
Hang on, let me, for everybody who can't talk. He's saying that money used to actually have a bond to something of real value. Silver. Yes. Money is based on human labor, and it used to be tied to something of real value. So it represented something, like we've agreed, we can choose to represent it to be something, and that depends on our mutual consent. But it's also something that can be given an intrinsic value, metallic, and traditionally metallic. So if you guys will hold on to this argument, we're going to have it again at the end, all right? I don't want to stop this argument or discussion or whatever, but I want to go through a few more things, because what we're going to talk about now is how the state, that's your flower, so you're going to be listening very carefully to this bit, aren't you? Took on the role of adapting and driving the change in the financial system. And the second thing that happened is the metallic content, the silver and the gold, eventually evaporated. Now you all know that on your pound notes, 5, 10, 20 or whatever, there's a note that says, I promise to pay the bearer the sum of X pounds in gold. Nobody's going to get that, right? You know that if you go to the Bank of England, they'll just say, no, we don't do that anymore. You know that, right? If you were hoping for like a really lovely, shiny gift. And the reason is that we've abandoned having any backing of intrinsic value of metals or whatever for the last 40-odd years. And so what I'm going to talk about now is how we got to that point. And we're going to come back to this debate that we've just been having. So we've come to Britain now. We've left Holland. And sterling took dominance. Remember, I'm talking about money in this international sense. Money as part of the international financial system. So money as the international reserve currency. And England at that time led world trade. And London led the world financial system. And these two things, as we discussed a little bit earlier, were intrinsically linked. They weren't coincidental. But what was innovated here in Britain was this. This is my little bag of gold. This is where my coins are coming from. And I am right now the Bank of England. And even though the Queen's empire stretches to the four corners of the world and the sun never sets upon it, all of the gold of all of the world is right here in London. And now I'm talking about 150 years ago. Now why is that? Why was all the gold here, and what had happened to change that? Trade. Trade routes. So what do you mean? Why would that mean the gold stayed all in one place? Everybody brought their gold to London. And so what happened was, when people were trading with each other, they would basically ask the Bank of England to change the label from this country's to that. England became the world's banker. Not quite the world's, though they may have thought so at the time. In other European countries with their own empires, their own currency played this role, but England's was the biggest and the broadest. And what this meant was another innovation of the state, and where we can see that policies and decisions made by governments relate to how the financial system works. And what we developed in the UK in the 19th century was the first ever central bank. It was managing the money supply. This is something that happens now. The money supply and quantitative easing. But in those days, what that meant was managing the labels and making sure that if anybody ended up without enough gold to pay their bills, to manage their trade, which would threaten in turn other people's trade and other people's bills, a credit crunch, they would intervene. They would shift the gold around. They would lend to the person who'd lost out. And instead of going bankrupt, the system would continue. So it required a central bank that oversaw the monetary system and intervened. And that was all underpinned by what? Come on, you all knew this a few minutes ago. What metal? Gold. The currency of Britain was tied to gold, the gold standard. So, though human labor wasn't involved in the money, there was some intrinsic value that everybody believed in. You couldn't eat the coins. But what's gold useful for? Yo, okay, wedding rings. Somebody said tea? Teeth. Not teeth, yeah, okay, I'm with you. Status. So basically we're saying it's not really that useful. Would anybody dispute that? Sorry? Electronics in the 19th century. Okay. Right. So what I'm trying to get at is that we had a financial system based on gold that relied upon absolutely and every day the financial system being governed. that governments and the political system ensured worked. The Bank of England became the lender of last resort for the very first time. What happened to change that situation? Where London was the world's financial capital, its trade was the biggest of any other country. What happened in the 20th century that basically fundamentally altered the balance of world power, the balance of the world's economy?
Our dependence on oil.
Our dependence on, I was actually thinking of the first two world wars. I say the first two, I don't know that the third one's coming. But oil is interesting because obviously those wars wouldn't have been possible without it. But the point is that some very major shocks to the global economy occurred in the space of a very short time. Remember, I talked about Byzantium having a solidus that didn't change barely 1/10 of a gram of its own gold content for 700 years. Yet Britain had the gold standard and led it for less than 100. And that was because of the two world wars, which left a different situation. And that was everybody was in debt. To who? America. In what currency? In the dollar. So what we had was a totally different political makeup of the global economy. And the global currency shifted to reflect that. In 1944, at Bretton Woods, the US and the UK began to negotiate how to govern the world economy, the world monetary system, and came up with the World Bank and the IMF and a series of other institutions designed to manage the global currency. And there was still a gold standard, but this gold standard was going to be tied to the dollar. All of the world's gold had moved from London to Fort Knox, and all of the world's currencies were tied to the dollar. This system was designed to manage the sorts of imbalances, to avoid credit crunches, or for countries, the credit crunches are known as balance of trades deficits, i.e. when they can't pay their bills and their currency collapses. The currencies were managed and the system was stable as long as the Americans played the role of oversight. Now, who knows the great story about how that all came to an end? Why did the Bretton Woods system of fixed exchange rates end? Somebody keen over there.
The 1970s.
1970s what?
The oil shocks in the 1970s.
Oil shocks. What other reasons?
The dollar was no longer related to gold.
The dollar wasn't anymore related to gold. Why not?
The more gold than in
There was no more gold.
Vietnam, I mean the
Vietnam. What did Vietnam have to do with gold?
but the quantity of money that was needed to pay for the army.
So the quantity of money that was needed to pay for the Vietnam War. That's exactly what I was trying to get at. Oil shocks was another one. That meant that the Americans were no longer respecting their role or playing their role governing the monetary system. They were inflating the value of their own currency, but ostensibly it was meant to be tied to gold and to every other currency. What this meant, there's a third reason, by the way, that is often cited that's a little bit more controversial, and that is the inflation in America due to the Great Society, from anti-discrimination in the civil rights movement. But the point is that the American dollar was no longer reflecting in the exchange rate to gold and to the other currencies the value of the American economy. So what did the French do? Anybody French in the audience? I can see one. What happened in 1971? No, the French Revolution was a lot earlier. I'm pretty certain, I'm not a historian, but I'm pretty certain. The French were a little bit worried that President Nixon wasn't entirely honest. And they were worried that precisely what we described, that Nixon was printing money when he shouldn't have been, was going on. And they were worried there wasn't enough gold to honor the exchange rate of the French franc. So they, and please don't take offense, but in a wonderfully French fashion, sent a gunboat to New York Harbor to ever so politely ask for our gold back, please. You know about this? Valéry Giscard d'Estaing was the finance minister at the time, I believe. Did they get their gold back? Go on, guess. They didn't. And the Bretton Woods system came to an end. And this is the point at which we enter the modern era of the financial system. Because the point at which the Bretton Woods system came to an end, and it didn't happen in an instant, but it happened over several years, was the point at which currencies began to trade freely. And this created a whole new set of problems. I remember when we confronted different problems hundreds of years ago, we solved them with new financial innovations. Well, the same thing was going on and has been going on since the 1970s. Right, we got plenty of time to chat about this. So all the people who are worried about the debate about money, don't worry, we're getting back to it. What were the consequences of this change? Who can say, who wants to contribute, guess, argue, point out what happened? What happens when currencies and the exchange rate system is no longer managed? What are some of the first consequences? Devaluations, speculation, imbalances. What do you mean by imbalances?
That some countries were able to basically consume more than
some countries are able to consume
than
they were producing. So they could go into deficit, and other countries would go into surplus. They would have savings. What other, anybody else want to say? So we've talked about speculation, we've talked about depreciation, so we're talking about volatility in your case, aren't we? And we're talking about imbalances, where some countries would accrue more and more and more. What? What would they accrue? Debt? Well, some would be accruing savings, but what? Were they collecting gold? So what was the store of value? Remember our definition, one of our definitions? What was the store of value that people are collecting when they have reserves? Other currencies. Other currencies. So we're going to go back to my favorite bit of this sort of workshop. What are currencies based on when there's no metallic value underneath? Nothing. Or each other. Our trust that they are worth something. If I offer one of you, by the way, did I give you guys a pound to look at, a bricks and pound? I'd like to do a bit of advertising, but I'm giving 2 out. Once I did this, I used to work for NEF, by the way, the New Economics Foundation, and we did an event called The Bigger Picture. Was that a cheer from someone? And I'm going to say something about NEF's membership now, so whoever was cheering. So I did this event for the very first time, and I gave out 9 of those, and 3 came back. Everybody was really right on. They want to change the world. They believe in justice and fairness, and they still nicked my 6 quid. So I have a system with you guys, and I want you to reflect on this about what we said about money. Who did I give the 2 pounds to first? To you and to you. Right. If I don't get it back, you have to pay me a pound. So whoever's got it. So is this worth a pound?
In Brixton, yeah.
In Brixton or now? Now. So we just turned this into money. Or we've brought Brixton to us, which may be another way of putting it. The point is, if I don't get it back, you two are on the line. And I don't want chocolate either. So the point about, where did we get to? We were talking about the implications of the Bretton Woods system ending. We have a system of globally fluctuating currencies. What else coincided with this period? Neoliberalism. The oil shocks, and neoliberalism. What else? What fundamental changes in our global economy and our global society occurred? Deregulation of what? Everything. Sweet. What else? Deindustrialization in some places, and in other places?
Globalization.
Globalization. Right. So what I want to argue right now is that globalization, or at least, I know it's a term that nobody wants to use because nobody knows what the hell it means anymore. Probably true of me too. But I want to argue that whatever that thing is, it's financialization. So what we've seen since the 1970s is a dramatic increase in a series of phenomena that have had a stimulative effect on the changes in the financial system that have brought us to the gleaming, shining metal and steel business that's over there. In case you don't know, that's the City of London I'm pointing at, not the big train station. You have volatility. You have new markets in volatility management tools. Who knows what the term hedging is? Who wants to explain it? It's a different question. Sorry?
Spreading your risk.
Spreading your risk, managing your risk, insuring against your risk, precisely. So you have volatility creates a need. What does it do to countries, especially perhaps small ones like developing countries, if there are suddenly huge and instantly fluctuating financial flows? What do they have to do to cope?
Either increase their production of their products that they're selling on the open
Increase their
market,
production and sell more,
lowering the price of it,
lowering the price,
and becoming possibly even poorer.
and becoming possibly even poorer. Another strategy that's become, I've got no dispute with that. Sorry, cutting public services. Because who do they borrow from? Who buys their debt? World Bank? Well, they borrow from the World Bank, but they also borrow from private international markets. And what deregulation meant was that more and more investors could invest anywhere they wanted. And more money was being created. Now let's stop a second and think about fractional reserve banking. And the fact of leverage. People have probably heard this term, but I wonder how many feel confident defining it. Don't all volunteer at once. Really, it's overwhelming. If you have £1 in your reserves, you can leverage it to £20. And I'm talking a little bit about the fractions we talked about before. Money can be lent on the basis of money. Money can be created from money, as you put it. So we have a very different situation. And we have different financial instruments going up to deal with them. And we have a different financial situation which countries confront. Another strategy that they've developed, driven by what you suggested, produce more, sell more, is to accumulate reserves. Who knows how much China owns of American dollars?
Over $1 trillion.
Over $1 trillion? Hi, it is like bingo, isn't it? I feel like brute foresight. Higher! Over $2 trillion apparently, though it's a little bit secretive and there's all sorts of conspiracy theories about where it's going and why and how and so on. Nevertheless, they've got a lot of dollars. They are America's banker. So reserves have become the way in which you can insure yourself against what? Speculation. You said speculation. Speculative attack.
Fall in the market.
Fall in the markets. Bubbles. So what we saw as a result of this very different situation was one phenomenon above all, one sector above all grew, and that was the financial sector. In the last study I read in 2007, each day on currency markets, $3.2 trillion are traded each day. Who knows what the global GDP is? Guess, go on, I'd be curious to know what people think. How much? 50. Again, Brucey, higher. 60, that's closer. Right, we're there or thereabouts. The point is, think about that exchange happening every single day. There's about 260 business days a year. It takes a few weeks to match the global value of every economic transaction that happens everywhere, every day in a year. And it takes a few weeks. Bank sector itself grew from 1980, $2.5 trillion to $40 trillion by assets. In 1980, global bank assets were worth 20 times the then global economy. By 2006, they were worth 75 times, according to the UN. The beneficiaries and the markets behind this changed era include not only the banks, but all the markets in which these esoteric instruments, these innovations that are celebrated for their efficiency and their hedging, their risk management ability, exploded. In the last decade, we had a new innovation, something called the credit default swap, a way of buying insurance against the company you've invested in going bust. And in 2002, they were worth in total less than $1 trillion. In 2007, they were worth $60 trillion. That's 5 years. So what I'm trying to get at, oh my God, that was my last page. No, it wasn't. Phew. It's like, what am I trying to get at? Is a discussion with you guys, and we've got more than 15 minutes, about what we think we need to do about it, whether it's money or the political system behind it that we need to reform. Is it quantitative easing and giving more money to the banks? I'm assuming most people will be against that one. Or do we need to nationalize them? Do we need to not say creating money from money is the problem, but how we create it? Do we need to ban interest? Or do we need to ban the creation of money full stop? In fact, some people here would even argue we need to ban money. So, is it a Robin Hood tax? Is it capital controls? Is it stopping the flow and the speculation and the power to topple small economies and large? What is it that we need to do for a start? Let's start with money. Who thinks we need to ban money? What, do you guys all stand together and hang out together alone? Or? Go on. Give us your reasons.
We don't need a law to ban money, but we have to produce abundance that the money will be unusable.
So we have to produce what? So that money is no longer useful?
Abundance of resources.
An abundance of resources. Thank you. Who disagrees with that? You're close enough to speak for yourself.
As far as I understand it, one of the reasons that money is useful is that some of the resources we might produce are perishable. So you might want to bake some bread during the day, but you can't keep your bread for very long. So if you want to actually have a store of the value in that bread, then you can do that through money.
So money is useful because it can help us to store value. So if we wanted to go and exchange something for our bread, we wouldn't have to figure out how many 3/4 of an egg we'd have to change for it. Who else wants to talk about that? Can you reach? Or can you shout? Shout.
I think that probably right now, in the long right? The point is, money does not have any exchange for the value they carry on the face. On the 20-pound notes are right 20, but this 20-pound notes in itself doesn't mean any 20 anything. It's not 20x. It's not 20 nothing.
So who heard that? Who didn't hear that? Shall I repeat that? 20-pound note no longer means 20 anything. Money has nothing underlying it. Does that imply that we think we should have a gold standard return? Raise your hands. Who thinks we need to just go back to gold? Sorry?
It does have something on it. It has the trust on
Say, tell everyone.
I'm just saying that the £20 has trust underneath it. We trust it. The minute we stop trusting, enough of us stop trusting, then it will cease to have it. But while there's a critical mass of people who trust that £20, it'll have £20 value.
So we don't need to go back to the gold standard. Anybody change their mind? You, sir, in the back. Shout, or do you want the thing? You have to promise to be quick. Well, we've got 15 minutes.
I think it's a bit abstract to talk about abolishing money without talking about the problems of capitalism itself. It can sound abstract, but I genuinely think that the way that capitalism operates is the problem. That's the problem. Money is just a way of exchanging a skill or a commodity. You know, I can unblock your toilet, I need a haircut. Unfortunately, it's not the barber's toilet that's blocked, it's someone else's. So I swap my blocking of the toilet for money in order to buy the haircut from someone else. But under capitalism, what you have is people with huge amounts of money trying to make more money via, and this is the means, they employ people for less than the value that those people create. Therefore, there is not one atom of a millionaire's wealth which is not the result of someone else's unpaid labour. The problem is capitalism.
Anybody want to disagree with that? We're not having a dialogue between two people. There's somebody who hasn't spoken there, excuse me. Can you shout, or do you want the mic?
I think it's, by that logic, it's not necessarily just capitalism is the problem. Capitalism, just like money, is just a way of doing things. It's neutral like all technology. It's people that are the problem. And it's people's relationship with the world around them and with each other that needs to change ultimately. And perhaps one way to do that would be get rid of limited liability companies. Because if people have something to lose from certain activity, their behavior changes.
Right. You got a point? You were.
The system that I would like to see is a slowing down of all this high-speed exchanges between international countries on various stock exchanges. Slow it down. Have the banks half owned by governments, so there would be a control mechanism. Two, that's two, three. I don't know. I'll come back on three.
Right. So there's two really interesting points. I think we'll move on from the discussion about what money is and say, what do we do about it? Is it the way and the speed in which money transfers around the world, the scale? And is it who it's done by? You said we should partly nationalize them. Is the problem money itself, or is the problem the way we manage it?
Both.
Both. So money itself needs to change. We need to have something solid, some real value. Human sweat and toil, gold, precious metals of some sort. There's somebody in the back there who was very keen to have a gold standard. That's why I'm looking at you.
Can I sum it up in one word?
Go on.
The word I'm heading for is not capitalism, not communism, but cooperativism.
Cooperativism. Now, have there ever been such a thing as cooperative banks? And how did they do in the recent crisis? Pretty well, apart from the ones that went bust. 3 of them. Scotland, one in the north and one in the west. Taken over. So the point is, sorry? The cooperative bank is actually technically not a cooperative. It is owned by a cooperative and runs as a non-cooperative called Cooperative Financial Services. But that's an aside. So I want to get back to this point, and I want to hear a few more opinions. Do we need to focus first on reforming who owns the banks, or who decides how the money is created? Do we need to focus on the flow of money between countries, slow it down, put grit in the wheels, I think is a famous phrase, or sand in the wheels? Or do we need to focus on the nature and presence of money itself? Come on, I want some more views. I want to hear from people who haven't spoken. Oh, excuse me.
Can I ask you to choose a color? Blue, all of you. Blue, gray, or black?
Do I have to tell you?
Who has chosen yellow? Point is, all your questions are into the game, into the system. Maybe we need to think out of the box.
What, isn't banning money out of the box?
Still.
Still inside the box?
Yes.
That's a very big box.
And yeah, really it is. Yes and no, I should answer. Both of them are the two ways of the same road. Maybe the answer is change direction.
I think, I don't know that much about this, but I think the problem is not money or how it's generated or how it's traded exactly, but it's the question of how we collectively agree on values. So there's a lot of things that we value that don't have monetary value that suffer because they don't fit into the system. And there's always been these parallel exchanges that happen at the same time. And this is where we're losing in terms of the ecology, is one huge example. But the question of how do we, except for our governments, which don't really operate, how do we collectively create and agree on a system of values that actually is represented by what we actually value? So I think this is where money is illusory, because a lot of times certain things have value that many people don't actually value. And then other things that we value very much have no monetary value at all, can't be exchanged for anything at all, and can be lost.
Can you pass the gentleman back?
Okay, I just wanted to say something about, very similar to what this woman said. Forget money, forget all these things. We need, as a species, to decide on a direction to take, right? And you missed a fundamental thing in your explanation of money, yeah? And how that's come about, how the West has become the dominant power and all the rest of it. Okay? Everything that runs in parallel, what you're just talking about, is
power,
technology. Okay? We live in a highly technical world now, where we can do away with money completely. We can evolve out of money. I don't mean ban it overnight. We can evolve out of money. What we need to do is establish a global set of values where we're going, yeah? Because the only place we're going now is ecological destruction, right? Continued poverty, continued war. The monetary system depends on problems, yeah, to make profit from. Profit's the mechanism, right, that is destroying this planet, destroys your lives. It keeps you from having access from the things that you need in everyday life. And I just want to make one point about where we're going as far as people talking about jobs and bringing jobs back. This is all bullshit, right? Most people do meaningless jobs, banking, insurance, and all the rest of it, right? These jobs create nothing, they produce nothing, they do nothing for society other than end up, you know, in continuous war, people in poverty, a small group of people running the world as we know it, right? You have to understand that it's money that is the mechanism that corrupts people. You said it yourself. You handed out £9.
I got 3 back.
You're supposed to be sitting with a bunch of ethical people, but they were still corrupted in a small group of people, okay? Money is the mechanism that corrupts you, and it's the environment that you live in that creates your cultural values and what you apply in your life.
Okay, I've got some people who are, I can hear nodding and disagreeing, so I want to, do you want to respond? There was a couple people here who were disagreeing, I think, so was it just you? I think other heard people, okay.
Yeah, so, on some points I disagree, but I think there's something right what you say. Coming back on the value points that the lady over there was saying, I think there's something that maybe we should remember is that money needs technology to some extent. I'm not quite sure about that, but if they were, I've got a question, and is imagine that everything is free, totally free. Do we need money? And if everything is free, it means that we need no private property. So is private property the origin of our problems? That's my question. I personally think that if there were no private properties, there would be a less corruption. I might be mistaken. And that was my point. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I think we can't make the problem so big that it is unsolvable. So why don't we agree on certain movements and then take from there? For example, recently people didn't like Mubarak, they brought him down. Now we've got another problem, which is the coalition government, which has a set of values that we don't agree with, and we have a chance. I think this country has a chance to make a stand for what it believes, but we've got to take it one step at a time.
I'm afraid we're going to wrap up with the final comments. But I just want to really reflect a little bit, because I realize, and I said at the start, I'm not going to be trying to give any answers, because I do think that this is a debate that merits a lot more discussion before people start to definitively decide about what the solutions are. But I do think it's important to appreciate that where we have come to has long roots that go back very, very far. And if we're going to talk about the financial system, and I've been from a trader in the city to, you know, doing microfinance in developing countries, which is not a good term, but there you go, to doing it in Lambeth where I live. And in the terms in which I see it, I do think actually every single one of these debates are the ones we need to continue to have. We need to think about what the system is behind the money that we take for granted. We need to think about the way that we invest, who it's done by, for what purpose, whether it's profit or whether it's some other more progressive goal. But I don't think we've come close yet to solving these problems, and I hope that this will stimulate you guys to engage with it a bit more. So thank you very much, everyone. And anybody who wants chocolate, I've got loads left over.